The following episode will contain spoilers. You have been warned.
You're listening to Cinema IRL, the podcast that throws you into the movie and asks the question, what would you do? Picking a new pope is serious business, and don't think that just because they are men of the cloth that they aren't capable of some really shady shenanigans. Amber and Scott discuss after watching Conclave, and now, Cinema IRL.
I wish I could switch places for just one day.
What would you do?
Put yourself in my shoes.
How do we handle this?
What would you do?
Put yourself in my position.
What would you do?
Now it's your turn.
If the church can't get away from the concept of lesser of two or three or four evils in their elections, what hope do we have with American politics?
Indeed. So this episode, we are talking about Conclave. It follows one of the world's most secretive and ancient events, selecting the new pope. Cardinal Lawrence is tasked with running this covert process after the unexpected death of the beloved pope. Once the Catholic Church's most powerful leaders have gathered from around the world and are locked together in the Vatican halls, Lawrence uncovers a trail of deep secrets left in the dead pope's wake, secrets which could shake the foundations of the church. No kidding. This was some drama.
Wait, scandal? Scandal in the Catholic Church? No.
Yeah, this was a bumpy ride. And I was raised Catholic. I went to parochial school for 8 years. As I was mentioning to you on the car on the way to record this episode, I actually remember, the process of a pope being elected when I was younger, and actually too. And it's a tradition that is just steeped in formality and circumstance, or pomp and circumstance. But it was a fascinating story because basically, and I don't know if this is true or not, I have to plead ignorance on this, but there was someone who was basically the dean of the College of the Cardinals, and that was Ray Fine's role. And I don't know if that really exists, but
It would make sense that, you obviously the Pope runs the church, but you need someone who's going to be there to be able to run stuff procedurally.
yeah, it's like a chief of staff, like the White House has.
So I feel confident that actually probably is real.
So he ends up running the conclave to elect a new pope once the prior pope has passed. And in the process of doing this, he keeps running in and discovering little bits of troubling information about some of the top candidates to be the next pope, and sometimes digs in a little deep and sometimes says, I shouldn't be doing this, and then information presents itself again, and he comes across one of the front runners who turns out has bought some votes and flown in someone to create some drama for another front runner, and then this whole process just starts getting very much like our political system with everyone's skeletons in the closet.
Yeah, it was pretty messed up. But I mean, I think in the end, he felt like his job was not to help or hinder any particular person. His job was to ensure that the best person was elected pope. Like whatever's going to be the best for the church, that's who it was. And at one point he thought it was going to be him. And then I think he realized in the end, nope, not really. Because they ran out of other really good people.
Yeah, because one of the other front runners turned out that he had some sort of tryst with a 19-year-old when he was 30, and she ended up getting pregnant and having a son, and that scandal erupted. So all of this during the just couple of days of the conclave.
Yeah, you can't have the Pope's son coming out. That's the problem.
Yeah, and ultimately the big twist at the end, and folks, heed the warning, the big twist at the end is
the
that
person they do actually elect.
Yeah, ends up having a complicated backstory.
They had a penis and a uterus.
Yeah, so it had been found out that this person had actually at one point been scheduled for a hysterectomy and didn't go through with it. And so that was the big twist at the end. So what would you do? What would you do if you were in the role of Cardinal Lawrence, who was the dean, who was the person who was meant to safeguard this process to maintain the integrity of the conclave?
Are you even allowed to talk on this?
Why?
Because you're a girl. Girl.
Oh, I should just sit here legs and have to just be in service to you.
Invisible. No. So you mean when he finds out?
I mean, anything. It was really a fascinating premise, I thought, of someone who was really meant to guide the integrity of the process. And as he had to do this, he did have to dig a little deeper and snoop a little and investigate this and pursue that, because he ultimately felt responsible for who got elected. That's a lot of weight.
I mean, by the time he found out about the new one, it's not like you can't really do anything at that point. Like, you've told the world, we have a new pope.
Well, they were about to tell the world. He
Well,
had been elected, but it hadn't been announced.
Yeah. Well, I feel like they said go announce it, and then they figured this out. But I don't think it mattered, even whether they had done it or not, because I don't think they're gonna I don't think there's any basis that by which they could come back and say, oh, that person's got a uterus, we got to axe them.
Yeah, I think it was just the irony of the fact that all of these other scandals came up and booted other people, and in a lot of ways, if it was determined that the newly elected pope had this complicated medical history, that would definitely, from this monumentous occasion of the placement of the new pope.
Yeah, you just kind of bury the hell out of that one and just move on.
So what would I do if I was Cardinal Lawrence, who was in charge of this process? I think I would take that responsibility just as seriously as he did, because there's only one pope. And unlike the president we have in the United States, there's not a term limit. That pope can be in there for decades. That pope that's like a someone on the Supreme Court. That's a lifelong appointment. So that is about as serious as an appointment can get.
Yeah, I think what I might have actually done if I had been him would have been at the beginning of the process, told everyone, hey, listen, I'm running this. I'm also disqualifying myself from receiving votes for this. Because he knew he didn't want to be pope.
And he did tell people, and people continued to vote for him.
But I mean, he should have said it in front of the conclave up front so that they knew that anything he did was not politically motivated whatsoever. And I think that's where part of the problem came in, is that some people thought that his motivations for what he was doing were political. And
I think the only person who thought that was the one who had paid off other cardinals to vote in his favor.
No, even Bellini also mentioned his level of ambition.
Yeah, and Cardinal Bellini later in the film apologized and said that actually I directed it at you, but it was more about me and looking at myself.
But I'm just saying, if you do that up front, you eliminate even the thought of impropriety. Like you're showing, listen, obviously it's not about me because I'm not going to be the next pope. I just want to make sure that the right person is. And I think, in the what would you do in real life, if I'm him, that's what I'm doing. I'm announcing I'm not going to be the next pope. So it gives him carte blanche to be able to investigate and dig and do what he needs to do to make sure the right candidate is chosen without someone else going, well, you're just doing that to shovel dirt on someone.
Another interesting what would you do from this film that I think is worth exploring is the fact that on the day that they are supposed to be sequestered, this new arrival comes and basically is an ordained cardinal who no one knows even existed and supposedly was ordained in secret. And this is the one that ends up actually being appointed pope.
Well, which it becomes apparent later. They had suspicions why up front, but I think it becomes clear at the end exactly why he was ordained a cardinal in secret. Right.
So on the first vote, he ends up receiving a vote. And my first inclination was he voted for himself. And then on the next vote, he gets a couple more votes and a couple more votes. And ultimately, what puts him in the position where everyone ultimately votes for him is there's a bombing. And one of the top candidates for the appointment basically says all of this is happening because we have welcomed all the different religions, all the different churches here, and they don't welcome us. and was talking about religious conflict and religious war and the escalation of not accepting other religions. And
My homeboy was calling for a jihad.
yeah, and the newbie basically said, we need to not go into our decisions, our behavior, anything that we do with an idea of this being war.
Hashtag rise above hate.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a very anti-hate agenda. And right after he retorted and gave that speech, he was elected.
No?
And
I mean, sometimes the best campaign speeches can be the ones that aren't intended to be campaign speeches.
yeah, and it was interesting because no one knew anything about him at all because he just literally appeared before everything was sequestered. So it's not even like they could go out and get information or talk to people. At that point, they were restricted from talking to anybody. If I was one of those cardinals and someone had stepped up like that to put a different spin and put a different perspective out there to the one that had just been presented, even though I didn't know the history of this person, I think I would have a lot of respect for that person of having the courage to be a leader when they were new, and it would be perfectly acceptable to just kind of sit back and watch what was happening this one.
Well, it also got concerning because most of the candidates who were more forward thinking, whether you liked them or not, basically found themselves getting disqualified. So it turned out near the end here that the only real guy you've got left who hasn't been mired in scandal is the guy who is looking to take the church back a good 60, 70 years. Tedesco, yes.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, like, somebody had to stand up there or else it would have been Pope Tedesco.
So what would I do if I was a cardinal and presented with the opportunity to be the Pope? It's interesting because you look at religious figures and priests and cardinals and there's a huge perception, but I think in the fact when you lead a life in service to God that you shouldn't be ambitious, that you live in service to the community, to your church, to the greater good. And it's interesting when push comes to shove, there is a lot of ambition in wanting to be in a position of power where you can shape things.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. No matter how righteous and pious you are, you eventually, I mean, like, you know that when you're a cardinal, you're near the top of that food chain, and like the top of the food chain's one link away, and there is human nature to want to seek significance and to want to be a leader.
And the Pope has an amazing amount of power and influence over the people in the Catholic Church. I remember a point where in the Catholic Church history where birth control was frowned upon. And therefore you would have a lot of families with really, really large families, a lot of kids. And that is, in my opinion, out of sync with the world we live in today. To say that it is against the church to use birth control. And when you think about how we evolve as a society, how culture changes, the views of the Pope actually do affect the people on Main Street.
Oh, yeah.
In circumstances like that, because I know there are families and women and couples that had children and had children and had children because it was not approved by the Catholic Church to utilize birth control once upon a time.
I mean, listen, I can't say I know this for sure, but I do know I was raised Catholic, and I do know that I have 4 siblings. So
Had to check with your mom on her birth control methods, huh?
No, that's definitely not going to happen ever. Mom, if you hear this, and I know you will, I don't want to know.
So if you could be the Pope, would you?
I mean, you get the Pope mobile.
You do, and you get some really pretty garments.
Yeah, nice hats. Tall hats. Yeah, you know, that whole, like, vow of chastity thing is kind of a deal breaker for me. So I say no.
Okay, noted. No Pope for you.
We hope you enjoyed our episode. Thank you for listening. And to catch all the new episodes, please subscribe. We release 2 to 3 episodes weekly, so we'll have new content regularly. Until next time.